Cool. So we're going to still do this in the 3 parts that we did Wednesday. Mainly, what we're going to build first is this input, and make sure that it is getting the user input whenever they type, like so. Second step is when they type, this drop-down list appears, and this is buttons. These are all button elements, just with the text. And the third step is when a button is clicked, 3 things happen. The list disappears, the text disappears, and the one we clicked on, that object, is passed to another function and generates this display we see. So I'm going to cut off this live preview now, and we'll go to what we're building. All right, and just so I don't have to worry about formatting, I'm going to hurry and add a prettier file. Okay, so first things first, let's build the main markup we're going to need. So we're going to have, to begin with, 2 divs here, a div inside of another div. And I'm just doing that for the sake of, again, simplicity. I'm not going to want to style my body element at all, so this is kind of acting as the body. And then I have this to be, again, putting some elements into. So this div is going to have a class of container. And directly in here, we will have the input for the user. 3 attributes we're going to give this: type, text, ID of user input, and a placeholder. I'll just say enter a country name. Should be good to start with. Okay, so now we can go build in the functionality. We're going to go select this in our JS and make it so the typing is tracked. And if I'm ever going too quick and you need just a second to look at the page, let me know. Totally fine. So we're going to wrap this entire file in something called an IFE. Does anyone know what an IFE is?
Never heard of that before.
Yeah, it looks like this. You say parentheses, and then you write function parentheses, object brackets, like so. So it's just a function declaration with no name wrapped in parentheses. And then I'm going to hit enter in between the curly brackets. And at the end, after the closing parentheses, I'm going to do another set of parentheses. So this is an immediately evoked function. The reason why we want to do this is vanilla JavaScript. So if I declare any variables like this, just in my file, it is global. And typically you don't want to pollute, they say, you don't want to pollute your global namespace. So by wrapping your entire application in a function that fires immediately, an immediately evoked function, none of the variables we declare in here are global. They are scoped to this function. So it's just a good practice. If you're using Node, this happens for you automatically. Every file, every module has its own closure, its own local scope. So we don't need to worry about that. Okay. So first, let's grab the input. So we're going to say const user input, document, element by ID, user input. I misspelled this file, so it's not working. Okay. On the user input, we need to add event listener that listens for key press, right? What is being input? Does anyone know the event listener given to an input that listens for every time something is typed?
Key up.
I think key up could work. There's a more general one that kind of accounts for just general typing. In React, they generalize this and call it the onChange. But onChange doesn't work in basic JavaScript for this purpose, so you have to use the input event listener. And this will call a function called handle change, which we have not defined yet, so right now it doesn't exist. Maybe I'll call this handle input to match. Handle change is kind of a convention you need to use in React, but this is an input event, so we'll handle the input. So let's go ahead and declare that function, handle input. When an event is called, what is the function passed from the event? This event gives this function something.
The event.
Event object. This is very important because whether it's React or vanilla JavaScript, we're going to know what the user's typing in this input by using the event. So the first line of this, we're going to destructure the event target to get the value. So we'll say const object brackets value inside the object brackets equals event.target. Now this line here is synonymous with saying const value equals event.target.value. But you should get used to this syntax, because if this object had multiple properties you wanted, you could just get them all out like this, rather than having to say this 4 times. All we need is the value. All right, once we have the value, we will go ahead and fetch the data from the API. So I'm not going to use Axios, we're just going to use the base fetch. This can be used for HTTP requests. And I'm just going to plug the URL in here inside of backticks. And after the name / is where I'm going to say $ curly brackets and input the value of what the user just typed. Right, so this is going to go get the data, and when it comes back from a fetch, it's going to resolve in a promise to a .then. But the fun thing with fetch is it doesn't convert your data to JavaScript automatically. So the first thing you do with the response is you convert it. You say res.json and call it as a method. This passes the actual JavaScript data to another promise, which we can then use to console log the response for now. And in case there's an error, we do want to catch it so it doesn't crash our program, and we'll just console log it for now. So I use the res, this is response, and error, obviously for error. Save a little time on typing. Let's see what happens now. So I'm going to go live. You should be able to as well once you get this typed out. And you should see your input. And if you open your console, every time you type a letter, we should be getting a response. Now, if nothing is found, the API will send you a 404 error, and that's why we're console logging it here. That's totally fine. So I'm going to type in F, and I should see 168 results. Type R, I have 7 results. I type A, now I have 2 results. If I open this up, I can see these country objects in here. Like here's France and French Polynesia. Cool, good so far. Well,
Yeah, working.
It's working. Cool. Well, that's step 1, right? We got this working. This is part 1, capture the input, able to handle the input as it comes in, and check the console so we know we're getting our data when we're typing. Now, I've worked with this API a bit over the last few days, but just so you know, each object that this array has, the properties we're worried about are name, flag, which is a image URL, population, and region. So every object in this array will have a .name, flag, population, and region, and that's what we're going to have display at the end. And put that up here just as a note. Okay. Well, when this data comes back, we don't want to just console log it. We want to generate the whole drop-down list we were seeing. So that is the next part. So what we're going to do in here, instead of console logging the response, we're going to call a function called update dropdown and pass in that response. And again, this function doesn't exist yet, but now we know what we need to go write next. And as we saw, actually, this response, the first time it hits us, it's like 168 objects. We don't want to drop down that tall. So we're going to pass in res.slice from 0 to 10. So that just says, regardless of how big this array is, if it's more than 10, only send 10. If it's less than 10, it will still just send the couple that it has. Okay. So next function we will write is function update dropdown. Update dropdown is going to receive this array of 10 items or less. So we'll just say receive the array. And we will, I'm going to use some notes here just so we can keep track of what's happening. The code we're about to write will generate the new dropdown name. So we're going to use a higher order array method for this, just to get some practice. So we're going to use for each, which for each is synonymous with a for loop. It doesn't return anything. It'll always return undefined. So we're going to use it just like we would use a for loop, meaning I'm not going to say const, result equals array.for each. I don't need that because this will never return anything. So I'm just going to say array.for each, and that's giving us countries or results in here. So I'm going to say for each country in the array, do the following. All right, so what needs to happen here? We need to create button element. We need to add the country's name to it. We need to add an event listener to it. And we need to append it to something on the DOM. Now, we haven't accounted for what's on the DOM yet, so before we build this out, we're going to go back to the HTML file and make a container for our dropdown. Which, okay, so we got the container here that's holding the input. We're going to put the dropdown in here as well. So, and we're just going to be an empty div. This will have an ID of dropdown. And this is where we're going to populate all the buttons that we create in the for each. They're all going to get thrown in here. And this div has already been styled to appear right here on the screen. Okay, so back to the JavaScript. So first things first, let's create the button the old-fashioned way. We'll say const button equals document.create element button. Next, we'll add the text to it. So we'll say button.textContent equals, and we want this to be the name of the country. So we're going to use this object we're being provided by the for loop and say country name. Next, we're going to add an event listener, but we don't have anything just yet. So we're going to say button.add event listener. It'll be a click. And right now, we're just going to say null, as we don't have any. Actually, let's not do null. Let's do this. It's like an empty anonymous function. So it doesn't break, but it doesn't do anything. And then lastly, now that the button is created, has the text, and we'll have an event, we can add it to the drop-down list on the DOM. So we need to go select this in our JavaScript. So I do this up above all the functions. We'll say const dropdown equals document.getElementID dropdown. Now, in my file, it's line 26. It'll be similar for yours. Right under the add event listener, we'll say dropdown.append child button. Make sure I have that right. Okay, and now we can test it. Now when I type, the response is going to come back and immediately send the array into this function, which will map through it, or loop through it, and generate buttons for every country. So I'm going to type F, and you should see this appear. Right. So that's part 2. Almost. There's a little bit of a cleaning up we're going to have to do, because what happens when I type another letter? What is happening here? Let's type another letter. My list is growing. And as I delete letters, my list continues to grow and grow. Can anyone spot what the issue is? What am I not accounting for?
I understand how much we can.
Sorry, if someone was talking, I don't know.
I think it's we're hitting that API every time and adding to it, not replacing it.
Exactly. Yep. We're doing just fine at saying, give me the new array and add it to the list. But we're not saying erase the list first, so to speak, right? What was there doesn't need to be added to it. It needs to be completely replaced. React does this for you. But in vanilla JavaScript, you have to do your own cleanup work. So before I create my new list, I need to get rid of the old list. There's a quick and dirty way to do this in vanilla JavaScript, which we'll show you here. So this will be erase the previous drop-down list. And what we're going to say is just dropdown.inner HTML equals an empty string. This is, again, a quick way just to erase all the HTML that's inside of this div right here. You'll just delete everything that was there before going through the list and refilling it out. So now we get this nice effect of when I say F, we get the big list, but when I add to it, the list is getting replaced, showing up. Cool, but there's another issue here. When I type in a letter, if I backspace and go back to an empty input, I want this list to disappear. In fact, I don't even want, because right now the Axios request is happening. When I say backspace, it goes empty. This is still trying to go fetch it. And because of it, I am getting a 404 error because there's nothing after the endpoint and the API requires that. So I'm going to do a little bit of error handling, or not error handling, but more of bug handling here in the handle input. I only want to send this if someone has typed something in here. So I'm going to add an if statement if there is value.length. Because value.length, if it's 0, 0 is a falsy value, this request won't go out. So if there is length, if it's above 0, go ahead and send the request. Otherwise, let's clear out this list again. So I'm just going to copy this drop down inner HTML and paste it there. I'll add some notes here if you're following along.
So there's that kind of whole idea about security with inner HTML.
Yeah.
Is that just kind of okay?
Yeah, for the sakes and purposes here, it definitely is. The big issue with inner HTML is if it's used maliciously, you know, they can inject script tags into your document. But that's usually when it has to do with a form. Right, if you have inner HTML on some sort of form functionality, that it's injecting some elements that could be used. This is a little safer, but still not perfect case. But I don't think this would have any issue even in a production app with how we're using it.
You're not getting input from a user.
Yeah, this value here is never directly after something like this. Because if they could replace this with the value from an input, now they have power to manually update the DOM, which could be dangerous. But there's no way for them to do that here.
Cool.
Erase the current. Kind of explain why we're doing these things. And I'm going to add some notes here as well before we continue. All right. So that's part one and part two. We've got the input reacting to user clicks. If I backspace, now the drop-down clears out because there's no length in the value. That's working nicely. Part three is now when I click one of these buttons, the object that I have that represents France needs to be then appended to a couple elements and show up here on the page, while also clearing out the input in the list. So where am I going to start with that? I think right here is a good place to start. Our buttons have the event listener, just right now they're not doing anything. This is the functionality we get to build now. So instead of just returning an empty function body here, we're going to keep this anonymous function, but we're going to have it call a function called handle country select, and it's going to pass in the country object on the array. So this is really cool, right? When the buttons are all mapped out, when I first type, all of these buttons all have a click event. So when I click Fiji, the Fiji object is getting passed into this function, which is really cool. It remembers after the fact, after this is all done. This one remembers it's for France, Finland, Fiji, so forth. So now I just need to write my handle country select function. And we'll do that down here below update dropdown. This will receive a country object and just needs to take the properties from it that it wants and put them on the page. Before we do that, we need somewhere on the page for this country information to sit. So one more time to the HTML. Underneath these divs, right, this was just for the input and the dropdown. Below this, we are going to make a div with the ID of selected country, another empty div, where we can just drop all this information into when it's ready. All right. Div ID selected country. Back to the app.js. Let's go ahead and grab that up here. It's the last variable we're going to need from the DOM. So we're going to call this the selected country div. Document.get element by ID, selected country. Okay. So there's a couple things we're going to have to do in this function, but we just need a couple visual elements. So we want an H1 for the name, an image tag for the flag, and 2 P tags for the region and the population. So that's where we're going to be using these 4 attributes. This country object has these 4 things inside of it. So the first thing we'll do is create the elements. So we'll create an element for name, which will be an H1. And then holding an Option and Shift, I can press down and duplicate the line. Just say flag. There we go. Say image. Again, Option Shift down. Region. P tag. One more time. Population P tag. Okay. Next thing is adding content. So Some will be text, one will be an image URL. So first, the name, we will add to its text content the countries.name from here. Now I need to add the image URL, which is country.flag. I need to add that to the flag element here. So how do I do that? In vanilla JavaScript, how do I add an image URL source to an image tag?
Attribute.
Yeah, there's technically probably more than two ways. Two ways that come off the top of the mind. So you could say flag.set attribute. And that takes two things. It says, what attribute do you want? We'll say src. What value do you want? We'll say country.flag. So there's way one. Way number two is attributes are just object properties. So I could also just say flag.source equals country.flag.
That's nice.
So yeah, these are, if the attribute already exists, feel free just to use object notation, right? In HTML, we see this, but if I grab this div, which I have, this has a .id equal to dropdown. Attributes are just object properties. Next, we need to add the region text content to the region. So we'll say region content country.region. And then lastly, we'll do the same for population. We'll add the text content as the country.population.
And append it all.
Now it's time to append it all, yes. Append all things to the other thing, to the DOM, yeah. So we're appending all of these to the selected country div. And if we use append child, as long as we append them in order, they will display in order. So we'll do that. We'll say selected country div.append child name. And then I'm just going to copy this down 3 times with that option shift down. And then just say flag. Okay. Now we can test it. So I'll type in FR, I'll click on France, and voila.
Wow.
Almost perfect. All right, this is still sitting there obtrusively, and this is still full, so I have to erase that to see it, but it's there. So that's the first bug we're going to fix in this final part, is we'd like this to clear out when we click on a country. Additionally, if you haven't spotted it yet, there is one more bug. If I click on Belgium, it gets added to the list, not replaced. Again, React would do this for you. This is do-it-yourself land, where we get to do it ourselves. So before I do all of this, just like right before I generated the new dropdown, before I create all of this, I should probably clear out what might already be there. In addition, I can also clear out this input and the existing dropdown right here, right before I go and create the display. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll say selected country div.innerHTML empty. Dropdown.innerHTML equals empty. And then the user input, I'll just set its .value to empty as well to erase the input. Now, if you've gotten through module 2, I want to say, when you go through the to-do list project, I show you another way to clear out an element by looping through its children and removing children until there's no more children left. That would probably be better than this inner HTML. Just call a little function that does that to your point as far as security. This is fine for a quick and dirty example. But that's probably the only change I'd make to this to make it like production ready. So I'd actually swap this out for the removing child nodes with a while loop. Okay. So let's test that now. I'll say France, I'll click it. Everything clears out and appears. I'll try Belgium, click it. And we're getting this nice replacing going on.
Sweet.
Cool. So one or two last things I want to add. I want to make sure I know this is region, this is population. And I thought it would be kind of fun. Last week we did a code challenge where we had to add commas in a string. This is a perfect use case for it. So I can clearly see this is 11 million versus just a string of numbers. So let's add some text to these here. I'm going to say region.textContent. I'm going to wrap that in backticks and say region : $ curly brackets, country.region, and same for population. Backticks, population. Right, that alone helps a little bit. You can kind of see this a bit better. But now I'm going to pull in my insert commas function from last week and paste it down here. I'll throw it in the Slack channel as well, unless you're the kind of person that wants to write this whole thing out. We can walk through what it's doing too. Let me drop it. I'll put it as a comment as well, right underneath the CSS in Slack, in case you want to grab it.
So actually, I got a request.
Yeah.
So that would be, you could kind of think of that function as like a utility function, right?
Yeah.
And you might like import that to then
Sure.
just call it.
Yeah. Now the fun thing about that is we're in vanilla land, so there's no import export that we can use unless we're the browser supports, ES6, which fortunately import really isn't, I don't think, fully supported yet. So we could put this in another file, I believe. We could put this in a utils.js, because you're right, it is utility. It's used for kind of formatting. And I'll move this insert commas function over to utils. But I'm not going to wrap this one in an iffy because I want it to be global. I don't want it to be stuck inside of a scope that only this file has access to. Next, in my app.js, or sorry, my HTML, right above my app.js script, I'm going to script in my utils. Like so. The fun thing with this is I should be able to now console.log insert commas in this other file and have it be available in the global namespace. Right? So this file knows about it because this index HTML is taking all of this JavaScript and putting it in the same file at the end of everything. And since this one is not declared inside of any other function, it is available to every other script inside of it. Where the app.js, we wanted all of this code to be protected and private to this file. I don't want to be able to access this function anywhere else. So it's wrapped inside of the iffy. You can almost think of this as this, if we did this. This is what the file looks like at the end of it. This has, this content has access to this, but this does not have access to this because it's wrapped inside of a function. It's great. So now I'm just going to say, hey, when you drop the country population number inside of this text content, first insert commas, wrap country.population in that. So this, when it's pretty cool, right? It's going to say to the text content, add this string. It's going to see the function. It's going to go run this code, output the new number, and place it right here, and then add all of this to the text content. Now it's time for testing again. So, friends. Now we got cool commas.
Sweet. That's awesome.
Is that I kind of just ran with what you were saying. Was that the question you were asking, or did I completely answer something else?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's spot on.
I get excited and just kind of go for it. So, um,
So you have to kind of
cool.
use like a package or like a parcel type compiler if you want to use those import. If you want to like import that utility function rather than just add it to the HTML.
Right. The Babel is what helps with that, but there's no like export word I can use here. I'm wondering though, I wonder if I could do this. Let's see. Just to see if
Also,
ES6 import's been used yet. What's that?
I would also be curious, and not to say that we have to do this, but like if you wanted to be able to arrow down, like once you started typing, and then use the arrow key to navigate your drop-down list.
Oh, kind of like focus on the first element and you can, yeah, I didn't think about that. That could be fun. You might have time here. I'm just going to see if this import works. So I'm going to comment this out. Cannot use import statement outside of a module. Yeah, it's outside of a module. You know, it might be supported if I type this a different way, but I believe every file would have to start with a module.exports equals a function. So that I could pass in data from other modules. But I would want to study more on that before doing a lesson on it.
Yeah, the other
save
option works great.
Yeah, script in what you need. It's global. Yeah, so how would we do that? When the list appears, maybe this one, if I click down, it selects this and goes down to the bottom. When I hit here, it just keeps going down. Up, yeah. So
that would be like an event listener on focus, or?
I think it would be on the window because it's a key press event. But on key, yeah, so on the key press, we'd check if when they press up or down, we'd say, hey, does the drop down have children? Right? Is there elements inside the drop down right now? If so, select the first one and then iterate through those as they keep pressing down. So I'm willing to try this out. if we're wanting to try to think of that, it's a fun added challenge to this. Drop down. We'll say key down and handle key down. Oh, not drop down, sorry. Window got added in listener. We want the window to be listening for down press events. There's probably a million ways to do this too, but. All right, so we're gonna write the handle key down function. We'll just drop it down here. Receive the event. And we need to first figure out what is the event.which for the up and down key. So I'm going to go into here. I'm going to press down. Oh, handle key down. Oh, I did camel case. Press down. Where is export?
Oh,
oh yeah. Press down. So down is 40, up is 38. So the first thing we want to know is there a drop down to search? So if dropdown.children dot length. Children is a keyword, right? It'll just be an array of all the nodes that are inside of this HTML element. So if there is length, then we can say, are they pressing up or down? If event.which equals 40, if which equals 38.
And those numbers are just basically like mapped to the keyboard.
Yeah. There's a couple different identifiers inside the event that will tell you what the key represents, but some of them are like case sensitive. They can change on keyboards. Which is like the most consistent universally, I believe. It's been a minute since I've read on that, so maybe don't quote me on it, but I've always used it and hasn't steered me wrong yet. I know I did that off of reading something. Okay. So now, I mean, there's going to be some bugs in here to begin with. Obviously, we need to know which one we're selecting and hit the bottom and all that. But let's see. So if the event is 40, we want to draw focus to the button. Not sure how we're going to do that. We know the children. Let's console.log dropdown.children bracket, or just children. So now I'm going to open my console. I'm going to type something to generate a list, and then I'm going to press down to trigger this console log. So F down. All right. So there are the 10 elements in this collection. So we can open up this first button and see if there is something in here that could steer us. Maybe autofocus. Sure. We could also just change the color of the border, you know, make a visual look. It doesn't need to be like a programmatic thing. It could just be a style adjustment. Just toggling a class name on it, maybe that makes it look like it's focused.
Because the input gets that kind of blue highlight.
Yeah, buttons do when you click it. I mean, it's worth saying, let's see if we can set focus, where was it? Autofocus to true. And let's see if it visually changes anything. So we'll say dropdown.children bracket 0 autofocus. I'll try again. So visually, no change.
Hey, Nate, quick question.
Yeah.
I'm recording this and I can check it up later. I just jumped on a little late. You can check it out later on the dev channel or the dev students.
Yeah, I'll have the recording up there by this afternoon.
All right. Thank you so much, Nate. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I guess we could also do it via CSS, right? Like,
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Maybe we go
add a class.
Yeah, toggle a class even, because that's built in. So we'll say focused, maybe. This is the class name I'll choose, and I'll just say border 2 pixels solid cornflower blue. Dotted. Yeah, that sounds fun. So if it's selected, we just toggle the focus on it. So let's test that. We'll say drop down children. For now, we're just hard coding this to make sure the effect works. We'll say class list dot toggle. Focused. Toggle the focused class. And this, I love toggle because toggle will check the element. If it doesn't have it, it will add it. If it does have it, it will remove it. So it takes care of that logic for us. Okay. Now I will say F, press down.
I got like one, like a line. Mine kind of got like one line.
I think my dots are too small. Maybe I should have just done solid.
Or bold the text.
Yeah, I'll do that, and then text weight.
That's font weight. Font weight.
There we go. Cornflower blue would also help the color work if it's a real color. There we go. So now say France, press down. Yeah, so the issue is I've already made it so the buttons don't have borders.
Huh.
So here when I'm saying add border, it only does it to the bottom, which is probably good. So instead of border, we could say background color. Say cornflower blue. Okay, so now, wow, that's not, maybe we have to do this. Yeah, we have to import it to override our other settings, which is good, I guess. We don't want this to be overwritten unless we absolutely mean it. But
Sweet, that's awesome.
okay, now that only does it for 0, right? So now that we know the effect works, how do we make it so if I click it once, it goes down, down, down. If I click up, it actually goes back up. How do we work that out here? We know this is the code we need, but this is the number that needs to be dynamic. What could we do?
It's kind of like if you could control your eye.
Yes.
And iterate through it, and then.
So it might be a little messy looking just because it's its own thing, but we could declare index here, started at 0. Then here we can just say index. Then we can test again and make sure that still works. So we'll say F down. Okay, so still grab 0. So now when I press down, if it will increment or decrement this number, the effect, we'll also have to build the ability to toggle off the previous. So this will be fun. Might just end up using add, but okay.
We want to basically index plus plus.
Index plus plus or index minus minus, but only if there's another thing to get to, right? So we need an extra piece of logic in here. If they press down and index is less than dropdown.children.length, right? It hasn't hit the last one yet. Allow them to keep going down. Now on the up, if the event which is 38 and the index is greater than 0, allow them to go down. And I'm just going to copy this into here for now. So inside of both of these, this one will have a we want 0 to be first and then increment.
I just do 1 and then test it out and then toggle it if I need to.
That's fair.
Like increment it or decrement it.
Plus plus. Yeah, we'll do what I probably would have tried first. Let's just drop that in and hope for the best. But my mind's screaming it's not going to work. All right, so F. I is not defined. That makes sense because I don't have an I. All right, I knew it would work. See? All right, we'll press down. All right, and up. Toggle them off and up. We've got an effect. I think this is just a feature. The feature they didn't ask for, but it's the feature they deserve. Okay, so let's maybe start this. At -1. Now if I say F, if I press up, nothing happens, but if I press down, it gets the first one. That accounts for it. Awesome. Cool. What's the last piece of logic we need now? We need to make it so if I press down, the old one's index gets removed. So instead of, we could say drop down children index -1 dot class list. Like look at the previous one and toggle off, but so we're gonna have to think of the edge case and it's the first one. Down here we can do the same thing, but for the previous one plus 1. This will get us close, I believe. Right? It'll work if I press down enough. But the first one breaks because there is no index -1 when index is equal to 0. So we need to think of that edge case here and of this edge case here probably. Let's see. Yeah, and down there. So we could do a long chain operator here. There's a new operator being implemented that you just say this. It's like, hey, if this exists, then do the following, but I don't know if that's been adopted yet. Let's see. Oh, it has been. Oh, no, it hasn't. Oh, yeah, it has. Oh, I'm so confused. Why is it working here and not here? Somebody answer me. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so this is a new operator that just came out last 2 months ago, which if you don't have this, this is what you have to say. You have to say, if that exists, and, which is just like then, do this. So it's a shorthand for saying all of this. You can just say question mark period, and it inserts this statement for you. But we're going to try it with the long form statement and see if that fixes it. I don't know what's going on. All right. Friends. Down. Still hitting that. Which means when I press down, it increments it to 0. There's an interesting bug happening here. Go back to the other operator because this was obviously working. The issue is here. So very close. And I guess the last step would be like, cool, now if I press enter, it happens. So we can add that in here as well. What is the which of the enter key? It's 13. So in here I'll say if event dot which 13. Actually, I'll just add this as an else if in here because we probably only want this to happen if there's a dropdown. Then we just want to call our handle country select with the country that they're hovering over. Ooh, starting to hurt my head a bit. We know the index number of the item. So we could, if we were to save our drop-down data when it comes in, as a scoped variable, we could just index it. Because right now the array is private to all of this.
Can we grab that text from the button?
We could grab the text, but we also need the flag URL, the population, and the region. And the only data the button has, maybe we could add the data to the button. The button just carries it.
Or if we replace the value with the button text, and then it would do that search again, right?
Right, but you have to click on one of the buttons to trigger.
Oh, because it
handle country select. Yeah. So you click, because they're all mapped out, the button has an event listener that will pass the country, but this country object is not tied to the button at all. It's tied to the function that the button triggers. So down in here, this button, this dropdown, or the children, the buttons, don't actually have the full country. But we could try to just add it as a data attribute, see if that works, right? Button.data equals country, or data would be like this, country button.data set dot country. Then in here, I'm just going to console log that. Console.log dropdown dot children bracket 0 to see if it has that data added to it. Okay, does it have the data set of the country? It does, but it cannot save anything past just string, so we're just getting object. So we could, ooh, this is getting, we could just say stringify it.
So that's how you see. So that's how you see an object when it gives you that object. Like there's something there, but you just can't see into it. You can stringify it.
Well, stringify it is saying before you add the object to the element, turn it into one giant string. So actually now we should just see the string. So let's try that and make sure it works. Because I'm actually literally turning it into JSON. Focused. We'll go to the data set, country. Now see the entire country data is in here, but it's a giant string. But the fun thing is I can use json.parse to turn it back into JavaScript inside of this function, which is awesome. So handle country select, we're going to pass in json.parse drop down children bracket index dot data set dot country. Not confusing at all. Let's see if it works. Afghan. Holy crap, it worked. No, I clicked it. That's not fair. I have to hit enter. F down, enter. Oh, it worked.
Yay. That's awesome.
Getting some interesting CSS quirks, but I don't, oh, because the index doesn't repeat or reset. So if we hit enter, index equals -1. In fact, I'm going to move this to the top of my screen. So I can also say on click, in case they happen to click it, handle country select will also say index.
That's real magical stuff here.
Yeah, I mean, we got one more bug, right? It's just down here. I hit a class list, but now everything starts at the top every time, which is just amazing.
Cool. Well, thanks for the extra effort there on my crazy idea.
Yeah, it's fun. I just don't know why this isn't working. Cannot read property class list of undefined. So it's saying, hey, I read this, and still try to access the class list? Or no, it's saying it here. What if I just do this? Nope, it's not enough to save it.
What happens if you just restart at the beginning after 10?
So we could say in here, before this else if, we'd have another else if. It just asks if the index plus 1 is greater than the dropdown children.length minus 1, then set the index back to 0. That could work. Let's
Back
see.
to 0, back to -1.
0, so it goes back to first, which it did it, but it still hit an undefined. I think that's the issue. $78. Oh, it's saying this one. That don't make any sense. Does this need to be greater than or equal to? Oh, the length minus 1. Index is always 1 less than the length. Why did I? Let's see if that's enough. There's something interesting happening here.
That's working, kind of.
So now when it starts over, it doesn't unpaint the previous one because we only accounted for the ones next to each other, not the one at the top of the list versus the bottom. So here we have to say drop. And you guys can let me know if you've been done with this for a while and have had a, you've got me on a tangent now that I'm enjoying.
I love the problem solving. Like that's kind of where it is so hard to think through all the ways to solve the problem. It's been helpful for me.
Good. Well, in here we're going to say if we've hit the end and we're repeating back to the beginning, make sure the index up down dot children dot length minus 1 dot class list dot toggle focus. So if you hit the bottom and you go back to the top, make sure you untoggle the bottom. Ooh, we're getting close. Oh, because when this is 0, then we do need to say this line. Oh, there's probably a cleaner way to say this, but you get it working once, right? Go.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't work going
Yeah,
up.
that makes sure it works.
They can deal with that. What's that?
Just try typing FR with so you only have a list of 2 or 3.
Oh dear, is that gonna?
It should work.
Educate. Oh, because right here I'm hitting index plus 1 is greater than the length when it's 1. It's 2. Oh dear. Programming is fun. Okay, so if you have a couple, we're fine. France was the one selected there. So for some reason, the last one is still getting focused. Index plus 1 is greater than the children.length minus 1. And, no. And if we just delete the -1 and see what happens. Yeah, now it doesn't work going all the way through. And that's
Cool. Well, yeah, that's cool.
This looks painful outside of React.
right. Look how much we ended up typing to get all this.
Yeah.
Granted,
That's-
this has been a big piece, but let me stop the recording because now it's like movie length. Oh, instead of the recording, I got rid of the code.
I think this is